Good evening, everyone. I'm Priyamvada Natarajan, an astrophysicist and current director of the Franke program in Science and the Humanities at Yale. It's Yale's flagship interdisciplinary program. Today, we have a very exciting event, a talk by the eminent cognitive scientist and philosopher of biology, Professor Paco Calvo. Before I tell you more about the talk, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our benefactors, Mr. and Mrs. Richard and Barbara Franke, whose generosity enables us to do the programming that we do, including today's event. I'm also required to give you this notice regarding the recording of today's event, which, as you all know, will be available on Yale's YouTube channel under the Franke program. Yale University is photographing and videotaping this event. There's a possibility that you may be included in these visuals. By being present during these activities, you consent to the use of appearance, likeness, and voice by Yale for standard, nonprofit, educational, news-related, promotional, or other editorial purposes. So now let me tell you a little bit more about our speaker, Paco Calvo, who is a renowned neuroscientist widely recognized for his groundbreaking research in the field of plant cognition and intelligence. He's a professor at the University of Murcia in Spain, where he leads the Minimal Intelligence Lab, the MINT Lab, focusing on the study of minimal cognition in plants. His interdisciplinary work combines insights from biology, philosophy, and cognitive science to explore the fascinating world of plant behavior, decision-making, and problem-solving. So if you are like me and are in love with your plants, I think today we're going to get some scientific validation for our emotional response to our plants. By investigating the complex interactions and adaptive responses exhibited by plants, he has significantly contributed to our understanding of cognition beyond the animal kingdom, challenging conventional perspectives on the notion of intelligence itself and mental capacities. And of course, he is the author of a new book called Planta Sapiens, The New Science of Plant Intelligence. But before I turn over the floor to him, I would like to advertise a couple of our upcoming events that might be of interest to you. So on March 5th, we have Monica Ong, where we are partnering with the Yale Quantum Institute, and the title of her talk is Planetaria. It's a visual poetry reading and stargazing, and this would be done live along with the planetarium show at our Leitner Family Observatory and Planetarium. So please do sign up for it. Florian, it's not full already, is it? Oh, there's a wait list. Okay, but promises to be one of the most exciting events. On March 6th, we have a book talk and beer tasting in the land of Ninkasi. Just wait, it's not like a frat party. It's a history of beer in ancient Mesopotamia. And it's part 2 of the series. And many of you came to our series last week where we had cooking of a recipe from ancient Mesopotamia from a cuneiform tablet from Yale's Babylonian collection. So this is going to be led by Tate Paulette in collaboration with the Peabody Museum. On April 2nd, we have a book talk by Jamie Green, The Possibility of Life, about the search for life beyond Earth. And our final event for the semester will be on April 24th. It'll be the film screening of National Geographic's Endurance, the story of Sir Ernest Shackleton's fated trip to Antarctica and the recovery of his ship. Anyway, without further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to Paco. Thank you so much for accepting to speak this evening.
Yeah, hi, good morning. Well, thanks. Great to be here. It's just amazing, really. I mean, it's my very first time at New Haven and Yale, and just spent here the last couple of days, just enough time to feel the energy, and I mean it. This is just truly amazing. I can feel the vibration, the energy that you will have, so I'm pretty sure we're going to have a great time with plant lovers, talking plants. The title, of course, I mean, it has to do with the title of the book, but there is always a twist, right? So when we speak of Planta Sapiens, I could have titled the book something like Homo Stupidus, which is what we are. I'm sorry, don't feel insulted, but we just don't get it, right? So for some reason, I really mean it. So there is something we are doing which is really wrong. We just don't get it. They are here doing their things, just in front of us and we just don't see them, we don't get it, right? So there's something that we really need to change, right? Our frame of mind, I mean, generally speaking, not just doing this or that experiment, that won't change anything. It's about the frame of mind, right? We need to do something seriously different from what we've been doing thus far. And I was happy to hear about when I first got the invitation, I thought, oh, this is great. So I started to Google up the Frankie program, everything. I thought, whoa, this really is something I can resonate with very much. Is this idea of hey, where are we talking? We are obsessed with disciplines, with, oh, you are doing science, you are doing philosophy, this is humanities, this is empirical work, this is conceptual analysis. What is it that we are doing, right? And I just really resonated with this program, this idea, the invitation, and I thought, oh, I think we are on the same page, insofar as we really need to get rid of those boundaries and think of problems and not specific toolkits, right? So when we do that, we can get to ask many different questions that we might not have raised otherwise, right? So this is the type of thing you were telling me about just before we got started, right? So that's a PhD candidate in our group, and that's the type of questions we are thinking of, right? So as with the very title of the book, Planta Sapiens, we are not talking metaphorically. We are not trading in metaphors. We mean it literally, right? So this is what we mean to say. We mean to raise these type of questions and put them on the bench. So do the scientific work that is required to get to answer these type of questions. It's not simply a way of speaking. Like, oh yeah, plants are smart, they're intelligent, but what do we mean when we say they are making decisions, they are solving their own problems? What is it that we are up to, right? Not simply a way of speaking, right? So that sometimes implies that we reach out into different walks of life, right? And guess what? We were in this gathering in Dharamsala, in the Dalai Lama's place. And, we were told, hey, it was a gathering in between Western scientists and Buddhist monks. And they said, well, if you have a book or something, you can bring a complimentary copy to His Holiness. And there we were, all of us queuing with all the Western scientists with our copies. And then I went to him and said, we were into plant sentience, right? So are plants aware somehow? Do they have inner states? Do they have some form of subjective awareness? We are talking not just intelligence, but also sentience. Do they feel? What is it that they feel? What is it like to be a plant, right? And guess what? So, of course, what do you reckon His Holiness told me? I told him, plants are sentient. That was me handing the copy to him, right? So I was like, plants are sentient. So what do you guess he responded? Sure, right? How could they not be, right? I love it. I just love it. No, I just love it because that's not what he responded. I just love what you said, right? So you responded in the very same way I did. So I was expecting him to nod in agreement. So yeah, sure. So, okay, let's go back. I was here. I was like, plants are sentient. And then he went like, no way. He backed off and said, no way. Only animals can feel. And you know why this is interesting? Because I learned a great lesson from this. Because we have all these biases. In the preface of Planta Sapiens, I speak of navel gazing, right? Because there are so many types of centrism that we fall prey of, like anthropocentrism, animal centrism, neurocentrism. Oh, if you don't have neurons, you cannot think, right? You need neurons. Locomotion centrism. So you need to walk, you need to move, you need to, right? Reach your goals by displacing, by moving around, whatever, right? So it's all this navel-gazing attitude, like we provide the gold standard. And we think of ourselves as, the measurement, like we provide the rod. And then if you are close to me, then you might be smart, you might be intelligent to a certain degree, to a certain extent, insofar as you resemble me, right? So when I told His Holiness Planta Sentient, and I was expecting, as you were, him to nod, and he didn't, I learned a great lesson, which is, hey, the problem runs way deeper than we thought. You see? We are obsessed even to the extent that we say, hey, this is just we Western scientists, this Western-centric attitude, other walks of life, other traditional knowledge, other approaches, they will have got it. No, they haven't either. You see? So that's good news because it means this is work in progress. Way more than we thought we had to do, right? So look, the funny thing is that he gave us a copy of his book to all of us. And I was on the flight back from Delhi, I was reading that copy, and I came across this passage. And then I thought, oh, now I understand why he said that. Because he, as all of us, was obsessed with locomotion. Right? So you've got to, you've got to be able to feel. If you need to walk around, you need to hide, to hunt, to do this. But plants are sitting there. They're sessile. Many people say plants being rooted, they can't afford to be stupid. Sitting there, what do you need the smarts for? You don't really need them. But we are in the business of having to, so this crazy, hectic lifestyle that we live in, right? So we are the ones that need to develop, to evolve these adaptations, these traits, right? These smarts, right? So think how arrogant we are. We are very arrogant as a species. That we don't simply say, hey, hold on a sec, how smart they've got to be to keep passing their genes despite being rooted. So if they can't flee or walk away and they are still here doing their things, they've got to be bloody smart. They wouldn't be here otherwise. And yet we say, no, they don't resemble me. I'm the gold standard, right? So there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Here we go back to this idea of the Frankie program that I was resonating with about who is got to lead the investigation, because this is plant science, right? So when we are doing plant science, when we are studying plants, we might be thinking that, if you look at the lower branches, yeah, sure, you can do all the physiology, the plant physiology, you can be doing the cellular and the molecular biology, we can learn a lot about plant biochemistry, we can be doing all this, right? And yet, yesterday, for some reason unrelated to the talk, I came across this nice article on James Lovelock, like Gaia theory thing. And it was a very nice article. And he was saying something like this. Yeah, when you are doing those things down there, you get to know more and more about less and less. And I just loved that way of saying that, right? So, wow, yeah, sure. We are not, if somebody thinks that we set up a lab, the minimal intelligence lab, to know more and more about details of, photosynthesis, respiration, stomata opening or closing, this or that. No, that's not the idea. But you can have or know all the physiology in the world and yet still don't have the slightest clue as to what plants are up to. Because this is not the type of questions that can be answered from within a physiology or a reductionist or a mechanistic approach. This is not about the nuts and bolts. This is about connecting the dots with the upper level disciplines, right? So you cannot be doing the plant physiology unless you have the context of the evolutionary biology, developmental biology, the ecology, right? So unless we are able to do all that, we will be knowing a lot about less and less all the time, right? But it's even worse, because if you notice, I just sticking a little vertex at the top, and that's not evolutionary biology, developmental ecology, that's philosophy, right? So we set up our lab, Mint Lab is set up in a faculty of philosophy, right? So it's in a philosophy department. And many people ask, hey, lucky you. which is true. I mean, my dean always play the joke. Yeah, my dean said, okay, let's keep Paco busy. He's doing his things, his little things, and then he doesn't bother us, right? So apart from there is some truth to it, but on the other hand, some people might say, oh, lucky you are able to study plant intelligence despite being in a philosophy department. And I say, no, it's the other way around. I'm able to do it precisely because I'm not in a biology department or in a psychology department. So it's the only way in which I'm able to raise the type of questions we are raising, right? So in fact, you can go deeper and say, no, it's not just the philosophy, but the cognitive science as such. So philosophy is part of bigger, broader project. So we are teaming up with the psychologists, with the linguists, with the computer scientists, with the neuroscientists, blah, 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 blah. You add, so you name it. I mean, that's just 6 labels. We could keep adding labels, right? Because the cognitive sciences has grown bigger and bigger, and we have realized that we need to keep networking and teaming up with many, 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 many different disciplines, right? So when we are putting these two together, this is called the cognitive science hexagon from the 70s, right? Now we are putting together the cognitive science hexagon and the plant science hexagon. And now we can see what is that we are doing. We are doing plant cogsi. So this is plant cognitive science. It is the only way in which we can get to ask the type of questions we are asking. See? It wasn't a metaphor. If we ask, do plants learn? We mean it. The only problem is that if you go to a psychology department, they say, what are you talking about? They don't have neurons. How can they learn? They need neurons, right? So by default, the prejudice is that you cannot do those things unless you have the type of hardware, the type of substrate that is supposed to be needed, right? So we prejudge the issue on a priori grounds. And we can't get started. We simply don't get started, right? In fact, this can go way deeper. This adding of disciplines. This is the first project we get started with MintLab. It was a project from the Office of Naval Research on plant intelligence for robotics and AI, right? So just imagine what's headache number 1 to NASA and to the Jet Propulsion Lab. I mean, you put this rover on Mars, and what's your headache number 1? Oh, that costs a fortune. You don't want that rover to tilt over and stay there like on their wheels upside down till the end of the world, right? I mean, you need to make sure they reach their goals. They go from point A to point B without any accident, any contingencies that could happen, like sand dune, a slope, a cliff, a crack, and get stuck. You name it, anything. Anything could go wrong, and we know Murphy's Law. I'm sure something will go wrong, that's for sure, right? So what do? Do you envisage or do you foresee ahead of time everything that could go wrong and code it? That makes no sense. You need autonomy, right? So your toy needs to be autonomous, to be able to deal with those contingencies all by itself. It doesn't have time to listen to you, hey, turn left, turn right, watch out, right? So if you inspire your robots in plants, we call them growbots, a growing robot. Oh, you just get rid of the problems in one shot. Why? Because you grow out of your problems. If I'm a growing robot, if I'm a growbot, I reach my goal not through locomotion. I don't do like this to get there. I grow. So that means I grow from point A to point B, which means that I reach B without leaving A. And this simply means that I don't need to worry about the crack, about the sand dune, about the cliff. I grow over my problems. You see what I mean? So sometimes simply by changing that frame of mind, you get rid of the problems. You don't need to code them. You don't need to get to write the code to foresee those possibilities ahead of time. The problem dissolves, right? So look, this is just an example of a wild type. This is a root of rice. The wild type and the mutant. The wild type can circumnutate, right? So it's circumnutation. Darwin coined this expression to speak of this pattern of nodding, like when a plant is growing, the shoot or the root is doing like this. This nodding is like, and then it's circumnutating, it's revolving in circles. So that's the way plants explore their surroundings, right? So a root doesn't simply grow straight, it just grows doing like this, right? Or a shoot. If you time lapse a plant, you will see them growing like this, right? So that's the pattern of circumnutation. So if you have a root that does so, the top one you'll see, and the bottom one doesn't, is unable to circumnutate, is a mutant, you see the top one exploring the surroundings, and the bottom one is simply growing in circles. It's just like stuck, right? So what's the explanation of this? Think about it. So when those guys said, hey, plants, they can't afford to be stupid, who is sitting at the wheel? Who is doing the driving? There's nobody sitting at the wheel, we think, because it's difficult for us to come to terms with the idea that somebody at the plant's head, right? Where is the head? The plant is fully distributed. It's a divide and conquer strategy, right? So who could be at the sitting wheel? Where is the driving seat, right? So what we find here is that we are not speaking in those terms because we are getting rid of those metaphors, tailor-made for humans. We think of ourselves, due to this computer metaphor, in terms of like the hardware and the software, the brain and the mind. And we picture yourself. I picture, there's the Paco here inside my head. There's a little Paco doing the driving, right? And what could that possibly mean? We don't find any homunculus. There is not a little I within me. You think you are? You think you have one? Right? So what we find is that what we call smart behavior, adaptive intelligent behavior, is the emergent result of those interactions. So how a root is circumnutating and impacting on the solid surface, and as a result of the interaction, developing this pattern of exploration. Is simply doing that as the emergent outcome of the interaction of the growing tip with respect to the surface it's growing onto, right? So you don't need to be thinking of anyone sitting at the wheel. It's the emergent result, it's the emergent outcome of those interactions, right? So if you think of a robot, go back to this experience on Mars with your rover, you could be thinking of a robot, you see, that grows and circumnutates, and that's just a growing robot. You see, it simply grows. Think of it as you are inflating it, and because it's circumnutating, it's able to avoid obstacles. The one on the right, unable to circumnutate, as soon as it's facing something, it just gets stuck. You see? Where is the smartness? You cannot point it anywhere unless you look at the whole system. You see? Now we can skip this idea of knowing more and more about less and less. Now this has to do with the holistic understanding of those emergent patterns of interaction, right? So that's the type of things we do at the Minimal Intelligence Lab. Those are the type of questions that we raise. And if you think, well, we know, I mean, there are many examples we could use, but we know that, cuscuta. Cuscuta is this plant that cannot do photosynthesis. It has no chloroplast, right? So it needs to reach out and look for a host and suck up its nutrients, right? So it can sniff them out, right? They can sniff them out, the target there, and then they can go for them. Now, the difference in between speaking of plant physiology and applying a cognitive science approach, a plant cognitive science approach, is that we are talking about plant behavior. So we are talking about plants behaving in the very same way that we speak of animals behaving, right? We just need to simply get rid of the idea of, make sure that we are not simply speaking of developmental changes. So we speak of plant behavior in terms of patterns of growth. Certain patterns of growth is their way of behaving. They could behave adaptively or not. We just need to pay attention to which patterns of behavior speak to their smarts, right? The choices they make, for example. If a plant is making a choice, and we can see that choice in terms of the patterns of growth, we can time-lapse a plant. You say, take a picture every minute, every 5 minutes, assemble the footage, watch the clip, and then you say, hey, I can see the plant making a choice. Then we are discussing, or at least we have in principle the possibility of discussing whether that pattern of plant behavior speaks to its intelligence or not, right? So we are not put it differently, we are not doing anything different from what we do when we study animal behavior, animal intelligence. So the principles apply equally. We only need to get rid of the idea that you've got to be an animal, to have neurons, to locomote. If you get rid of those prejudices, then the rules of the game apply equally, right? So just look at this Cuscuta on the hand, reaching out for this, right? There it goes. Nice. Jaws, right? Now, now they will drill through, once gets there, stuck there, drills through the phloem to suck up the sugars, and then start growing, right? Now, what happens here is that we are truly speaking of plant behavior. So this is not just understanding the physiology. We are talking about the choices being made. Because if you give the plant a choice, they will go for the one with the sugars. If they don't have the tomato plant, they will stay with the less juicy host. But they will surely decide whether they should grow left or right, depending on who is sitting next to them, right? And we know they do these things, anything but accidentally. I mean, they are actually, of course, they are truly telling about their neighbors through, for example, the ratio of different parts of the light spectrum. So the ratio of red to far red light is telling them a lot, because plants are, they are absorbing the red, they are reflecting and letting pass go the far red. So if there are more plants in the vicinity absorbing red, you're going to see what happens to the ratio, right? So those ratios are going to be highly informative, right? But the same happens. Remember the question of my PhD candidate. Can plants listen? Can plants perceive, right? So we can speak of vibrations. We can speak of volatile compounds. So we can speak of many, 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 many different channels that plants are tuning to. They are monitoring a lot of different types of information in order to make, to have a clear picture of what their surroundings look like. So that's the type of idea that you get. I insist, just one single type of information. In this case, the ratio of red to far red light, right? So if you have a high or a low ratio, that's going to tell you, hey, go this way, go that way, right? So the only difference is that they are not simply doing that. They are doing way more than this, right? So this is just to give you an idea that we cannot go through this, but this is just meant to give you an idea of, wow, all the different information they can in principle be monitoring. So all these parameters, this is all just the type of information, not just those light patterns, but everything going on out there that is potentially informative to the plant. So they can be in principle be dealing with all those things. And not just that, they should be able to integrating, passing along that information to provide a response that is globally adaptive. So they are not simply responding to this, like, the typical example, oh, blue light, phototropic response. So I'm going to grow this way because light is coming from there, right? No, it's not just that. They need to be paying attention to all this, right? And say, hey, I'm in the business of meaning making. I need to be making meaning out of those interactions with the biotic and the abiotic world out there. So all those parameters are in principle something that to care for, to look after, to search, to seek, right? Now, let's go back to this idea of what can we get by looking at the physiology. We have more and more details, more and more, and we have amazing technology. I mean, literally, you have every single month, you have what they call, in fact, in trends in plant science, the technology of the month, right? So you can have really, really detailed gadgets to pick, incredibly small, accurate, precise bits of information, right? And actually, we can even do what we do with human subjects. We can have an MRI. You can have a PET scan. We call it plant PET scan, right? So you can have an amazing amount of precision in the spatiotemporal patterns of activity underlying plant life, right? So you can be tracking down information and see what moves up and down the flowing, the signaling pathways at an incredible level of precision, right? And yet, we are not getting what's at stake. So now we can see what we're after. We want to understand the plant as an information processing agent. So it's not simply as, we don't think of the signaling or the phloem and the silent pathways as simply the freeways for the translocation of substances. So this is not just for, to bring the sugars or the nutrients or the water up and down the plant body. So we are talking about information being processed. So how is the plant processing information? That is the question, right? In fact, once we do that, once we approach plants from an information processing perspective, once we are doing plant cognitive science, then we can say, hey, we know, or we have more and more evidence that plants are actually making decisions. We know they can recognize kin from non-kin. We know they are sensitive to risk. We know that they can behave anticipatorily, right? So think about, for example, anticipatory behavior. If sometimes we think, plants can simply react to what's going on out there. Something nasty happens, they can react. So think about it. If something goes wrong, you want to know ahead of time. You need to make sure that you are able to anticipate what could go wrong, right? If we are fast, we humans, we have a nervous system. People think, we are fast, we can respond rapidly, we can, But in the case of plants, it's even more dramatic, the situation. Because if plants are slow, if it takes time for them to grow, to reach their goals, they'd better know in which direction to grow. So they truly need to anticipate. If it takes me 3-4 days to get to the station, I better make sure the train leaves from that station. I don't want to get there to realize that it was leaving from some other station, right? So if you're a slow grower, you'd better be able to anticipate because you might not have another chance. See what I mean? And the same goes for many other features like learning, foraging, mimicry, numerosity. This morning we talked about numerosity in the botanical garden with Ty, on the Venus flytrap, and some other competencies, right? But just when I was speaking of Planta Sapiens as not a metaphor, like we are talking Homo sapiens, Planta Sapiens, bacterial sapiens, we are talking about intelligence or sapiens in the tree of life, right? We can take the question to a deeper level. We can ask, hey, what's sleep for, right? I mean, what do we mean by sleep? Do plants sleep? Hey, Paco, now again, you are talking metaphorically, you are, this is Paco again. No, I mean it. What do we mean by sleep, right? So think what's happening in the animal kingdom when we have studied, the role of melatonin. We know that melatonin induces sleep, right? And we know it induces sleep. We know in mammals, it's being explored in fish. And now we know what happens in C. elegans or the fruit fly. So we are starting to understand that melatonin has a role to play in all these different species, animal species, right? So that's funny because I bet, I truly, that's me yesterday, right? So really jet lagged. And even this morning, I was still like kind of, getting to your time zone. Now, I bet any of you who have you've crossed the pond to Europe, whatever. I bet that any of you who has traveled with a pet, your cat or your dog, if you have, I'm pretty sure you have reached your destination and thought, my poor pet is got to be as jet lagged as I am, right? I feel, drained. I need the break. I need the rest. I'm pretty sure my pet feels the same. So it's so easy to empathize with our pets. Because, of course, it was this time of the day, it was time for me to have dinner, and all of a sudden, I get here, it's breakfast time, what happened, right? I'm shocked. So, of course, my pet is going to be equally shocked. I mean, we are both out of sync. It's not our rhythm, right? My body tells me it's this time, the local environment tells me otherwise. So we need to do something about it. We are both equally stressed, right? So I bet any of you traveling, including His Holiness, traveling with a potted plant, crossing the pond, would never cross their minds that your plant is as jet-lagged as you are. No, I mean it. Really, think about it. But why? Why do we think so? It's so obvious that they've got to be as jet-lagged as you are. The time has changed equally. They tell the time. They know when the sun is setting. They know when the sun is rising. If the sun doesn't set or rise when it's supposed to, hey, what happened? What went wrong, right? Why your pet can tell that and your plant doesn't, right? Because we don't empathize with them in the same way we empathize with animals. We can't help it. We don't put the same amount of energy in empathizing with them as we do with our fellow pets, right? And that's what we do. This is some of the research we are doing on this project on plant jet lag. So we are inducing a form of jet lag to plants by shifting the photoperiod in the lab. So this is a controlled growing chamber, right? Legumes, legumes fold their leaves. This is nyctinastic behavior. They fold their leaves when the sun sets. Actually, they anticipate sunset. So they start folding them prior to sunsets. And they start unfolding them prior to the sun rising in the morning, right? So we know it's all circadian based, of course. They have their circadian clocks, as we do. And precisely because that's the case, why would they not be expected to say, hey, what happened if their internal clocks are telling them something different from what the environment is telling them, right? But we still don't get it. We still think we are something special that, so we know melatonin has all these properties. I mean, the stories of melatonin is funny because, we identified the molecule in animals in the 60s. Then in plants, it got identified in the 90s, 1995. And it took the scientific community like 9 or 10 years to come to terms with the very idea of, hey, yeah, sure, plants have melatonin. And again, this human arrogance, we couldn't come to terms with the idea that we share this. And then we thought, okay, let's put the prefix. They have phytomelatonin. It's the same molecule. So they biosynthesize their own melatonin. We just need to add the prefix phyto to feel that we are special, right? But it's funny because if you look at the profile, so plant it peaks and it drops, so it has its own concentration changes, the temporal profile, throughout the 24 hours of the day. And we know that plants experience those changes in that concentration that relate to the day-night cycle. So we are doing this study in which we want to see whether first we can induce a form of jet lag to legumes and then ease them out of jet lag by applying exogenous melatonin, which is what you do when you travel. What do? We take tablets. Well, let's give them tablets, right? So you see, it's a little bit of the same. Actually, it's so that you can see how similar we are to each other. We took a Venus flytrap, like these mornings. We took a Venus flytrap to the vet. This is the vet school. You see the surgical room for pets and dogs. Well, this is veterinary school. They do it with all sorts of animals. But I took the Venus flytrap and told them, hey, do you have some isoflurane, the molecule, so the anesthetics that they use in the vet school, right? So they were like shocked. They were like, I cannot believe you. I mean, what do you mean to do with this? So let's anesthetize the plant, right? So they thought I was kidding them. And then that reminded me something that it's, I think it's very important. We spoke about the disciplines, the boundaries. Like we study veterinary or medicine or biology, or we don't talk to each other. We don't go, hey, we don't hang out there, hey. We don't tell them, have you realized that plants fire spikes of voltage? So action potentials. So the very same action potential that neurons fire, plant cells fire action potentials, right? So if you have isoflurane and you know what isoflurane is doing to your animal cells, It's compromising the membrane properties. So it's effectively, it's not allowing for the ions to cross those membranes. And then it doesn't depolarize the cell, so it doesn't spike, right? So if that's what's happening to a neuron, the same thing goes when it's a Venus flytrap. When you touch the inner hair and it triggers an action potential, you are doing the same. You are not allowing for the ions to cross the membrane, and then in fact you see the flat line. You can actually put a set of electrodes and see that so you don't see the action potential, right? But if you get to see it, if you don't anesthetize it and you get to see it, you see the very same action potential you see in neurons. So it depolarizes, repolarizes, hyperpolarizes. So the threefold phase of an action potential, you get to see it equally in a plant cell, right? And then if you see that we are on the same page, then you realize that, things are not that different. So I like to think that what we are after in studying plant intelligence is to think not what makes us special or different, but what unites us all, despite diversity. In the tree of life, what unites us all, right? So I like to think of this master key. It's like a master key that unlocks, opens any door in the tree of life, And that applies to being jet lagged, to being under the effect of anesthetics. That applies to it all because it has to do with life. So life needs a break. We all sleep. Life can be compromised. Life requires these day-night, cues. We are all on the same page. We simply do things differently, but there is something that we share. So this is the way to put it. We are obsessed with being special because we think of what makes us special. Like I have this or I have that. I have a neocortex. I walk, I do this, I do that. But we don't realize that what we share, what unites us all, is not what makes us special. What unites us all is the world we inhabit. So the sun sets and the sun rises for all of us. Animals, plants, fungi, bacteria. So it's all of us. So it's the world we inhabit, what we share. It's not about the hardware, neuronal or not. That's why it doesn't matter if you have neurons or not. You don't need to have neurons. You might need to fire spikes of voltage, but you don't need to be a neuron to do that. You see? In fact, you can anesthetize all these plants. We saw some of them this morning in the botanical at Yale University. And look, just check upper left, okay? That's the type of mimosa that we all know. You can touch it and it will fall, right? You don't need to time lapse. You can see it to the naked eye. This is real fast response, right? What happens when you anesthetize it? Look, bottom left. Nothing. It just boom. This is anesthetized. I insist with animal anesthetics, the same one you use in the vet, right? So look at that. Now, what happens when the anesthetic wears off? Bottom right. Now you see, it again falls, but it's like, what happened? It's little by little coming back to, right? So it's like dazed and confused, right? So this is interesting to me because it speaks to something very important. People usually pay attention, or people are really, really caught by the idea, you anesthetize the plant. Sometimes we do it live. So we would have done it here. You just bring a glass bell, put a cotton pad soaked with anesthetics, and it will absorb it through the leaves. And then after an hour or so, you will see it, right? You get to see it. But people get excited. Oh, wow, you anesthetize it. And I don't find that exciting. What's really exciting, think about it. This is important. What does it mean to come out of anesthesia? So what does it mean to come out of anesthesia? What's happening when you come out of anesthesia? What is it that you are regaining, right? That's it. So you had lost something temporarily, your subjective sense of awareness, right? And that's why we can intervene you, because we know you are not suffering. It's safe to zoom, right? You're anesthetized. And then when you come out of anesthesia, we say, he's back to normal. He's regaining something that had lost temporarily. So to me, that's the critical question. This is a philosophical question taken to the bench. So what does it take? What does it mean for a plant to come out of anesthesia? What is it that the plant is regaining, right? See? So the question is the very same question we can raise for an animal subject. We don't change the question. If you can be anesthetized and you are not sensitive anymore because this guy here wasn't sensitive anymore, now we say, hey, what happened now? What is it that you got that you had lost temporarily? If the answer, I'm not saying that we should know the answer. All I'm saying is that we should treat the situation symmetrically. If the answer in an animal subject is, of course, look, I mean, your mice, your lab rat or whatever, I mean, look, came out of anesthesia, now, you poke your finger and you see, again, it's rah. Well, if that is the response, that, oh, it's regaining, it's again aware, you cannot draw a different conclusion simply on the grounds that it's not an animal, because that's a prejudice. So it's regaining something. Oh, it's dosing. Oh, what happened, right? Now I'm folding slightly slower until it goes back to normal. It will take some time to go back to normal, right? That's funny because action potential, if you go to the dictionary, that's what you find. And there is nothing that connects it unidirectionally to neurons. So we are neurocentric, but it's so easy to get rid of that prejudice. I mean, just any cell would do the trick, right? In fact, that's what you find. The left is an animal neuronal action potential, right? The one on the right is a plant cell one. So you change, the resting potential is different values, different channels, different ions, but the overall profile, the very profile, I mean, the actual thing happening, the actual spike of voltage, the depolarization, the wave, that it is the very same thing, functionally speaking. So we speak the same language, the language of bioelectricity. So we have a shared language, and we inhabit a common world. So there are a way more things that unite us than divide us. We do things differently despite something being shared, right? We can go even deeper and think of psychology, experiments in psychology. I mean, learning. What does it take to learn? Think about it. When we are talking of, Pavlov's dog, when you're speaking of associations, right? Like associate, a bell. Oh, bell means food. I'm going to salivate now. Well, of course, you have to train your dog to do that, right? Because the bell doesn't mean anything, ecologically speaking, right? Once you establish the association, once you train your model, your animal, in this case the dog, on this association, and you trigger the condition response, right? All you are doing is relying on something that, has to do with connecting the dots. But the connecting of the dots can in principle be done by any form of life whatsoever. It's nothing specific to animal life. So it has to do with the need to connect the dots. And the need to connect the dots has to do with the emergency, the urgency, the urge to say, hey, this means that. Whenever these things happens, this other thing happens as well, right? And that simply has to do, again, with the world that we inhabit. Oh, there are cues out there. There are regularities. There are regularities out there that are informative to any form of life whatsoever. The sun setting, rising, temperature dropping, the relative humidity, now the predators come out, now time to hide or time to hunt if you're the predator. So all these regularities, round the clock, on a daily basis, on a seasonal basis, on a yearly basis, this is all information that any form of life has got to be able to tell. So put it differently, what form of life could afford not to connect the dots? You would be behaving reactively. So always catching up. You'd be, something happens and I'm going to update my expectations. So I'm going to catch up. No, you cannot be constantly catching up. You are dead meat. You've got to be behaving anticipatorily. So proactively, not reactively. And then when you behave proactively, then you are saying, hey, this means that. Now I'm connecting the dots, right? That's what's happening here. I mean, this is the type of examples that allows you to see that we are basically doing the same, right? Now, this is the nice examples of sound perception. We have many examples here. We have some plants that, like they can tell the pattern of vibration of their pollinators, right? There is this pollinator, and the specific pattern of vibration, they can tell it apart from other guys' vibrational patterns, who are not the ones I'm interested in. They are not my pollinators. And then when you tune to those, the ones you care about, you increase the nectar, the concentration, right? If it's somebody else, you don't. So we are not talking about once they've touched me. We are talking about the vibrational cues prior to getting there, right? We are connecting dots, anticipating what we want, right? Or the munching of caterpillars, right? So you can trigger chemical defenses, right? Put them in advance, anticipatorily, prior to it munching on you, right? So again, based on vibrational cues. Oh, this is the type of vibration that correlates with the munching caterpillar. I'd better do something about it, right? Anticipatorily. So we can be doing all this. This is, if I would say the big news or the breaking news, what I mean to say is that we've done, or we are trying to do, 2 revolutions for the price of one. One relates to plant science. We need to understand the plant sciences differently, right? So the very object of this course in plant science. So it's not plant physiology, it's not even ecophysiology. We spoke of something else, right? This integrated outcome of plant cognitive science, right? And the second revolution has to do with what we mean even within cognitive science. Because this idea I told you about, that like we have this computer science metaphor ingrained in our brains, like, oh, we think that, oh, brain, mind, hardware, software, somebody sitting at the wheel, neural code, like this is whatever is being done is through neural tissue. This computer metaphor is so deeply rooted in our mentality, the cognitive science revolution in the 60s, 70s, that we don't get to see it differently. We only see it in those terms. And you'll see what I mean. This is what a flower looks like, okay? To you, right? To you, to me. This is what it looks like to a pollinator under UV light, right? Because pollinators will be seeing those UV patterns that we miss. So the flowers that we see is not the flowers in terms of that relation of coevolution. This is the type of pattern that pollinators exploit, right? So what we see here is something that resembles the landmarks that you would need to land safely on the petal. So the petals of the flower are effectively providing the cues for the pollinator to land, right? So this is something that goes beyond the idea of a computational understanding of animal intelligence or plant intelligence. So we are, put it this way, we are not resorting to a computational or representational model of the mind in which you say, oh, okay, this is the insect, this is the pollinator. Okay, it's gonna crunch the numbers. Okay, what velocity you are doing, what's the distance? I'm gonna, pull out your pocket calculator and the numbers, and they say, okay, safely landed. No, it's something else. It has to do with the actual interaction. So when we speak of a plant, this is like the vine we saw before. If you have a vine, a climbing plant, reaching for a pole, like in this case, a climbing plant reaching for a pole, like a host tree or something, we cannot be thinking of the plant as computing how to get there or as trading in representations. So we don't see plants as intelligent because we have a distorted understanding of what intelligence boils down to in our own case. We think we have a representation of the target. Okay, this is the representation in my head. I compute, I do the numbers, I resort to those bits and pieces in my head, in my software, my piece of software. I follow the recipe in my mind, and then there I go. Okay, I reach out for the target, right? No, you don't do that. You simply interact. Remember the wild type of rice, simply circumnating, and the emergent result out of that interaction was the pattern of exploration that we saw. So if we think that the plant cannot be intelligent, if we think it cannot be intelligent because we cannot come to terms with the idea of the plant representing the pole and doing the computations that are needed, we don't get what we are after, even in our own case. So this is not about computing, this is about interacting. So in the interaction itself, you have the solution to the problem. You are simply perceiving, in this case, not a pole, but you are perceiving climbability, the possibility to climb. So climbability itself is the affordance, what the world is affording you. It's affording climbability. Or it's the type of support that allows me to twine around, given the size it has, the shape, my morphology, and provided I have this type of morphology and you have this shape, oh, it fits hunting glove. This works nice. But it's the interaction itself. It's the emergent outcome of those constraints. So we just need to get rid of the idea that we do it differently. So when I like to think with Planta Sapiens that we kill two birds with one stone, right? That we not only get to learn more about plants, but we get to rethink ourselves, in a sense, right? So we are doing the very same thing. Put it this way, we are not inflating plants, but deflating us. That's a good way to put it, right? So this is the type of information that you generate, right? When you move around the world. So that's the optic flow, right? So imagine you are moving around and I'm generating this information, right? So this is the type of information I generate, right? So I like, if I get close to you, my image expands in your retina, right? If I move away, it shrinks, right? So these patterns that we generate as we move with respect to the surroundings are the same patterns that the plant is generating. The only difference is that if you see, we are obsessed with us, navel gazing, and we only think of the tree as the passive object in the surroundings. So we think of ourselves as the ones generating those optic flows by moving around, and we treat the tree as the table, as the furniture, right? We don't see the plant as the agent. We do with animals. You don't need to be human, you don't need to have a neocortex. Invertebrates can do it. So we can think of a fly and generating the type of information the fly generates when it's flying along a corridor. So this optic flow is generating, right? So that's the type of information it generates when it moves with respect to the surroundings. So I'm moving around and generating information. Now, we just need to think that plants are doing exactly the same. They are generating energy flows when they move with respect to the surroundings. So when you think of, or just another classical example is you think of when you're braking, reaching the traffic lights or the stop signal, right? So you're having this image expanding in your retina, and then it's time to contact. How much time do I have left to reach the traffic lights, right? So you see how that image is expanding, that rate of change in your retina is telling you how much time you have left. So you are moving, you are creating a flow, in this case an optic flow, things are changing in your retina, and that flow is informing us to how to keep guiding that movement. So you close that loop, right? So you see, when I say what unites us is not the details of how you get to do it, but the actual loop itself. So all you need to do, instead of you driving your car, is think of your plant growing, this growing plant. So movement is not just locomotion, movement is also growth. So when a plant is growing, it's generating a type of flow that is informing the plant as to how to be growing, right? So think of the ratio. Remember the ratio I told you, red to far red light? So the plant is growing, right? So I'm growing like this. And I have plants over here who are what? Absorbing red. So when I'm growing, remember you had this game here when we were kids, like you close your eyes, you had to find something like cold, or hot. Did you play that? You would say cold and hot? Okay, so imagine I'm with my eyes shut, and then I start moving, and then you say cold, and then hotter, right? So how does it work? I need to close the loop. If you don't close the loop, it doesn't work. So if I'm staying still, I cannot generate information. I need to move in one direction or another so that you can tell me cold or hot. And then as I hear what you say, then I change gear, okay, right? So that's what the plant is doing. The plant is growing, and then the ratio of red to far red light goes up or down. And then that's cold or hot. Cold dies, absorbing red over here. Oh, I grow on the other. Oh, hot, hot, hot. The ratio drops. Okay, you see? So you get information by closing that loop. Again, what we share is the whirlwind habit and the strategies about it, not the actual details of the implementation. We do things differently in order to remain on the same page, right? One more thing. Oops. Yeah. You know, this is just Orson Welles when he was asked, you know the story, like it was a revolution in the world of, the history of cinema. Like what Orson Welles had done, it was like a whole revolution in every single thing about cinema. Like the camera movements, script, soundtrack, everything was revolutionary. So there was a before and an after Orson Welles, right? And he was just 25. And it's his first film ever. He came from theater. So it was his very first film, and it was like, hey, what happened here? So 20 years later, he was being interviewed by this BBC journalist, and then he said, hey, Orson, you're a genius. Because, of course, can you imagine all you need to know to understand what's still missing? Hey, this has been done, check. Oh, I'm going to do this. So you need to know the amount of things you need to know to master, to be able to realize what is still pending, what hasn't been done yet, is just astonishing. So they said, you were a genius. And then Orson Welles was like, what are you talking about? I hadn't the slightest clue. So he said it was the freedom of ignorance. So to the extent he had to explain to the interviewer that he said, look, I had my best friend to hold the camera, and I had to make him take this course, like crash course on cameras, because he didn't know even how to hold it. So it was not that he had this encyclopedic knowledge of cinema, and then he was able to identify what was missing. Is that he was able to do it because he wasn't aware that it couldn't be done, right? And that's what happens when we raise questions about plant intelligence. We are able to raise questions that we couldn't do otherwise if we were walking, straight walks of life, as in orthodox or mainstream plant physiology or orthodox or mainstream cognitive science. We wouldn't be able to raise these questions. Doesn't matter what answer we get, because this is science. And being science means that this is up for grabs. So this is open empirical questions. Most of what I report here is work in progress. That means we still don't know the answer. But it is a first step to be able to raise the very question that we haven't been able to do otherwise. So that's what I invite people to join, this quest for knowledge in the form of getting rid of prejudices and being able to raise the questions, quite regardless of the outcome, right? Thanks.
Thanks, Paco, for fantastic talk and for really bringing to our attention the sort of linear ways in which we are always mapping, deterministic ways in science in which we are mapping cause and effect, agency and action. And, your invitation to go beyond the sort of the standard ways in which we get locked into patterns of thinking. Fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much. So now we're opening the floor for questions. So please raise your hand.
Yeah. Start here, and then second.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation.
Thanks.
I read a book last year. I think it was called Searching for the Mother Tree, or Finding the Mother Tree. I don't know if you're familiar with it. But in it, the author, she did a lot of research on trees. And she discovered that older trees feed younger trees, that they're connected. And she injected dye into an older tree and discovered it in the younger trees. And she also discovered that when an older tree is dying, it will release all of its nutrients to feed all of the other trees around it. So it goes beyond the, finding light and stuff, they're actually feeding each other, which brings it up to, I think, a whole different level. I might also just suggest to you, you were talking about your interdisciplinary, you might add the Department of Theology into that and bring them into it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks. I mean, that's a great point, because you are talking about Susan Simard's work. Susan Simard is a forestry researcher in British Columbia, and she has worked on the mycorrhizal networks, right? So this is very interesting, because again, against our arrogance, we keep forgetting that we are holobionts, which we are the sum of different organisms. So we think of Homo sapiens, but we are not Homo sapiens. I mean, think of gut microbiota. I mean, we are aggregates of organisms, and we are all, symbiotically influencing each other. And that's what happens with the mycorrhizal networks in between the roots of trees and the mycelium of fungi, right? So that's a great example. It's a lot of research there. Again, a lot of apps for grabs, because it's this really recent discipline and it's all just starting. I may add that in this field, and as in all this research I've been reporting on, there is always the risk that we romanticize it. We like to think that they do care for their youngsters, that they are right. It doesn't need to be the case. So we don't need to think that in nature everything, we are all got to be nice to each other, and it's all about cooperation. So whichever the working hypothesis is got to be tested, and we should be thinking of the alternative hypothesis. So and the other thing is that we tend to put all plants in the same basket, as if and that's something that speaks again to our plant blindness. So we are so blind to plants that when people say, "Hey, are plants intelligent?" And then, as if you could give an answer. How you mean? Which plant? Right? We wouldn't say that if we are animals in you would say, which animal? An earthworm, a dolphin, an eagle, So the fact that we don't even ask which plant are you talking about, it's very, 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 representative of the situation, right? It really speaks to how blind we still are to plants. And something similar happens to this idea of the symbiotic relations. We need to be thinking of that particular interaction in between those guys, because in one instance that might be a cooperative thing, and in another instance it might not be. So let's think of them on a one-to-one basis.
Thank you. That was a fascinating talk. I wanted to ask you about this. There was this very celebrated Indian scientist in the 1920s, Sir Jagdish Chandra Bose.
J.C. Bose.
Who was in fact knighted at that time. And he I believe, recorded the first action potential from a plant cell. And I think his work fell by the wayside after him. And how much of that work is has been either thought to be true today, and how much is not?
Oh yeah, I mean the work of J.C. Bose, beginning of the 20th century, is at the heart of all the research being done at the moment. It was a great source of inspiration. He has a book called The Nervous Mechanism of Plants, 1928. So we are getting close to the centenary, the celebration. And there was a lot of work, a lot of inspiration coming from this polymath, Indian polymath. That's very interesting, the question, because we tend to think as if either everything goes or everything gets jettisoned, as if you couldn't have better and worse working hypotheses, as if one couldn't have been confirmed and others falsified, as if, right? So some of his thoughts were they weren't ripe for scientific testing, empirical testing, investigation. Others were confirmed, and because there is a mixture of the mystical and the scientific and all these aspects, it got all conflated into a one single, again, throwing everything into one basket rather than pulling it apart. and seeing what worked and what didn't. But to me, this is again something that has to do with the way we think of science, because we are so obsessed with science as if we speak of science as if it was the scientific method, the ABC of following, testing hypotheses, and we forget about the role of imagination in coming to terms of, or coming to think of hypotheses in the first place. So to me, that was one of the great kicks that we got from J.C. Bose. I mean, the insights as to think bold. So to be able to think bold and come up with hypotheses that you wouldn't have thought otherwise, coming from orthodox or mainstream science. That's, to me, what's really important. Then we'll get to see the best way to get them tested, right? And there is, again, another issue, which is like most of this work was being done in lab settings, in impoverished environments. So sometimes you will find that, hey, this plant is not doing anything. It's kind of boring. It's not doing anything interesting. Yeah, I mean, and come on, do something, right? And we forget that what's important for the plant is the ecological significance. So if we put the plant into, the example of mycorrhizal networks, what's the first thing people do in the lab? They put the plant in sterile soil. So they sterilize the soil. So they get rid of all the, symbiotic relationships. So no fungi, no guys there doing 90+% of plants are, in those relations with mycelium networks. So if you get rid of those, you get rid of plant life. In the very same way that if you get rid of my microbiota, you get rid of Paco. Well, it's really the case, right? So we might think that some of those experiments didn't work, and it might be true that they didn't work, but we didn't think carefully enough about, hey, would they hold if we were able to make ecological observations? So I truly think that we need to go for a plant ethology, become plant ethologists, as we do in animal research.
Hi. First, I'm concerned for any vegans that are in here or any vegans that read your book, because
you should be
the
concerned.
sentience of animals is one of the big justifications for not eating them. So you're going to starve people with this book. I'm genuinely curious how you think about that in terms of eating plants. I've thought about it myself, but my interest, sort of unique interest, is in herbal medicine and particular marker compounds inside plants that are used as human medicines, curcumin inside turmeric, for example, and the idea of playing caterpillar sounds or pollinator sounds to increase the sweetness of the nectar or the volume of the nectar is really interesting to me, and I'm wondering if there's anybody who's thinking about sort of customizing plants in that way to concentrate for particular marker compounds, whether it's an herbal medicine or otherwise.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, starting with the second question, definitely there is a lot of work in phytoacoustics. There are experiments on improving the qualities of vineyards, grapes, for wine quality, to play with, Vosse, the German speakers company, they are doing this collaboration with Italian scientists to test for those things in vineyards in the Tuscany. And anything you do research in Tuscany is worth doing. I mean, so that shouldn't be the problem, right? But there are many issues like in greenhouses in both in Holland and South Spain, like tomato plants are doing with different qualities, different profiles in terms of taste and flavor. Definitely. There's a lot of work in that field. Now. You are right. I mean, that's something that always, when I give talks and people say, hey, now what? I was a vegan, I was a vegetarian, I could sleep, like a log. No, didn't feel I was a sinner. And again, well, this, it resembles somehow the problem space of these baskets, like, plants on the same basket, we don't distinguishing between different plants, this sort of thing. And something similar happens here. So I'm increasingly concerned with abstract categories, because we divide the tree of life in kingdoms. and we speak of the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, bacteria, fungi, protists, and we don't realize that those are labels, those are categories, abstractions. So the animal kingdom doesn't exist. You exist as as an individual belonging to Homo sapiens, but we should be concerned with you ending up on my plate, right? So, but the individual, not the category, right? So, no, this is true because when we speak of, hey, what sort of choices we make, we speak as if the choice was good or safe, depending on which kingdom it comes from, as if coming from the kingdom was the actual, right? And we should be thinking about whether the particular individual that we are handling has gone through some form of stress that was avoidable, quite regardless of which kingdom it belongs to. See what I mean? So that doesn't mean that we have a clear-cut answer, but we have a different way to approach the problem.
It speaks to sustainability and
Yeah,
regenerative agriculture and these sorts of things.
absolutely.
Hi, over here. Thank you. That was fascinating. The Dalai Lama didn't come out very well. So I was thinking as you were discussing him that Buddhism comes from a very rich and successful agrarian society, therefore a society whose entire purpose is to exploit plants, and therefore a society that might be blind to their interiority. And I wondered if there were other philosophical traditions, and you sit in a philosophy department, which have given you more to work with. Are we all stupid in this respect, or have some human communities had an understanding of plants that is useful to you in your...
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. I think we are all stupid. No, I think it could be unfair to think, or it could be naive to think that one tribe, one group of people do have, do hold some secret that the rest of us haven't quite found yet, right? I think that's naive. But yeah, apart from the joke of Homo stupidus and versus Planta Sapiens, why I think that we are all, on the same page as insofar as how wrong we all are? Because in this meeting at Dharamsala with the Buddhist monks, what I found was that they were all very eager to say, hey, no, plants, no way. And yet, I didn't find anyone who wasn't open to the possibility of artificial sentience. Not the Buddhist monks, the first. So that was very, very shocking to me. You see? Because they were like, no, I mean it. I'm serious. So I was surprised after 3 days of meeting here in Dharamsala. So they could go, if you go to any books in consciousness, philosophy of mind books on consciousness, there is always a last chapter or an epilogue dealing with artificial sentience or artificial consciousness. Like we like to toy with the idea of emergence of sentience in some future form of artificial life, as if that could happen because we dream it, because we think of those AIs as created to resemble us. That we are able to interact, to engage with them conversationally speaking. Chat GPT, you get to chat. And we generate this illusion of comprehension. And it's just syntax. There is no semantics. It's just syntax, right? There's zeros and ones. So
Trees speak in many traditions.
yeah.
Many.
Yeah.
It's only actually quite recently in human history that trees stopped speaking. So there are lots of cultures which you can actually see intelligence by botanical.
Yeah. So one thing. So we tend to distinguish in between cognition and consciousness. So it's easier to come to terms, many more people come to terms with the idea of plant intelligence, but not with the idea of plant sentience. So those are two different things. So they might say, yeah, sure. That's complex adaptive behavior. That pattern of behavior deserves a label, smarts. But they wouldn't feel so inclined to acknowledge sentience. But I still agree that there are some traditions, Indian traditions, that they are way, closer to what I'm defending here. Yeah, certainly. But what I'm saying is that what's naive, so let me put it this way. What I think is naive is to think that there is a way to observe reality which is not biased, so that you can see things without wearing a pair of glasses. We all wear a pair of glasses. So the problem is not being unable not to wear them. The problem is not to know which ones you are wearing. So we are always going to be subjective. The problem is simply to know which ones you are wearing, right? That's where I find it fussy.
So, yeah, I want to push back a little bit as well, right? First, is because we know there are cultures that cohabit better. Coming back to your kind of point of view of how we should view vegetarianism, veganism, etc., as the amount of stress that a species has undergone before it ends up on our plate, right? But we do know there are cultures all around the world where they are harmonized better with the cycles of nature and with the life with the life stories of the beings that they share their environment with, right? So we know that there are definitely cultures that are more respectful. Maybe they're not as knowledgeable, but maybe they're respectful. I mean, is that what you would say? And as for plant intelligence, right, one of my favorite science fiction books from the 1800s is Lumen, the book in which you have sentient plants that are sort of talking to each other. So I think in fiction as well and in imagination, we've ascribed all kinds of intelligences. But I think it's actually science that has marginalized the plants, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So still, what worries me sometimes. So in this discourse of the discussion of plant intelligence, actually this is something I say in the preface of Planta Sapiens, which is I'm equally worried about the skeptics. So the skeptical attitude, those orthodox scientists that say no way, a priori, on a priori grounds, they just reject the very possibility. I'm equally worried about that attitude, but the same as the other attitude of overinterpreting. So I think that overinterpreting, it's another type of problem because it does a disfavor, a disservice, insofar as when you overinterpret to then underdeliver, you are serving to the skeptics to say, you see, I told you, right? So they might be right for the wrong reasons. So they might be sentient, you might have the hunch, but you might still be thinking that they are sentient because you are anthropomorphizing them. And one of the ideas is not do it because of what they are for themselves and in themselves. So one way to put it, think of what happens in environmental studies, right? So what's the golden term in environmental studies? Resources. And then we speak of the exploitation of resources, the thoughtful exploitation of how to exploit our resources in a better way. No, we don't get it. Insofar as we keep speaking of resources, we don't get it because we still think of the plant as an object. We need it, for clothes, for oxygen, for this, for everything. We need it, right? So we don't understand that we should be caring for them for their intrinsic value, quite regardless of us. So imagine we didn't exist. So let's travel back in time. We are Martian scientists landing on planet Earth a few million years ago, no Homo sapiens around, and then you might discuss how to empathize or how to care for those guys inhabiting this planet we just discovered for the value they have in themselves. We don't need to think of what they can give us. That's so only when we see them as agents, as subjects, and not as objects, is when we can start to empathize for the right reasons. Otherwise, there's always a trick to say, hey, yeah, here. Yeah.
Hi, great talk. I had one question, and then after hearing you answering other questions, I have a second one too. So the first question is just to think about, I was thinking about like, what do you think is the common structure that is required for intelligence here? When we think about the tree of life, what is it? Is it something that all these different creatures are sharing?
Yeah.
Or do you see it happening in some cases and not others? And then the other question is, what are the most intelligent plant species? Do you have a few ideas?
Two great questions. Thanks. Okay, so answer to question number one. Intelligence, the one we all share, life, has to do with behavior, which is not just adaptive. Okay, we don't simply want to speak of adaptive behavior. We assume it's got to be adaptive, of course, but it's got to be flexible, anticipatory, and goal-directed. So when you have those four things, now we are talking, right? Because otherwise you might say, yeah, sure. I mean, a vine twining around a host tree, that's an adaptation. You wouldn't say the plant is intelligent. You might say, hey, yeah, good for evolution. So you give the gold medal, the Olympic gold medal, to evolution as such, but not to the individual. We care about the individual. So it's the smarts of the individual, the one that is able to learn, to memorize, to make decisions. So depending on his past exposure. So what you have done through life that allows you to do this or do that. Your smarts, not your species, right? So depending on how flexible your behavior is, how anticipatory, how goal-directed, that speaks to your smarts, right? So that's, to me, the same that speaks to the smarts of bacteria or fungi or plants. Is it truly flexible? Because if it was a pre-programmed hardwired routine, it would be like a garage door. No, bacteria cannot be garage doors because the world is full of uncertainty. So they need to do these things we spoke before, like they need to anticipate, to behave flexibly, because what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. That's why you need flexibility and not have a hardwired behavioral repertoire. You need to be able to move out of your constrained repertoire, and that speaks to your, what you are able to accomplish through your life, not simply what you inherited in your genes, right? Now, the second question, I think you see how difficult it is. The very way of phrasing the question tells me that there is something we are still, like, which is the smartest plant, which is the most intelligent plant, as if it was a matter of, look, I always, I give these talks to secondary schools and I tell them who has better eyesight, right? Better vision, an earthworm or an eagle? And they all go, an eagle, an eagle, an eagle. Say, hold on a sec. Why? I mean, why would an earthworm need to see the way an eagle sees? I mean, that's great. Just actually, earthworms don't have eyes, have these little eye spots just for detect light gradients. That's all they need to move away from light into, right? So do they have worse vision? No, they have the vision they need to have in their ecosystem. So what sort of, so if you're a carnivorous plant, this morning we were checking out the carnivorous at the botanical, are you smarter because you can also, feed on exoskeletons from invertebrates? Well, that simply speaks to the type of soil, the ecosystem where you evolved. Well, it was poor soils in Carolina, and you evolved this adaptation, but that's neither better nor worse. It's what you evolved. Right. That's a good one. So again, if we go above ground, because again we forget that half of the plant lives below ground, right? So above ground, that's in my heart of hearts. I can't help it. I have this inclination for vines, climbers. Maybe again that's a bias because to me it's easier to see what they are up to, because time-lapsing vines is very rewarding. Well, you get to see what they do, right? I mean, passiflora. Passiflora, the passion flower. Darwin studied learning in passiflora, habituation learning, And actually, we want to get started with a project to study passiflora, endemic species of passiflora in Costa Rica, because precisely this thing I told you about being truly taking seriously the idea of being a plant ethologist. Like, hey, if I take a passiflora to a lab setting, we know there are reports from the 60s and 70s, some French physiologists were discovering that, if you are shifting a target throughout an experiment, the passiflora will keep tracking it. So if it's growing, it will just keep hunting, fetching it, right, after the pole, even if you keep shifting it, right? So you shift the location and it keeps updating expectations as to where the host is, right? So that's very interesting, but imagine what we might be able to find in the wild, because the amount of information that they rely on, so the type of dots they can be connecting explodes exponentially. So the amount of information that they are potentially relevant, that is potentially relevant to them, right? So vines to me are great subjects to study, but that might only speak to what comes easy to me. Again, that's a bias. Oh, it's easy for me to, it's like we like fast plants, Venus flytrap or mimosa. Oh, because we don't even need to time lapse them. We can watch them to the naked eye. That doesn't mean they are smarter. That means it's easier for me to study them. So some plant might be doing nothing, and I might be missing their smarts simply because I have a bias as to how their smarts should be exhibited. And they might be doing great despite maybe moving way less flashy. Think about behavior. When we speak of flexible behavior, we think of behavior as actions. But behaving is also not acting. I mean, if I'm stopping at the cross, I'm not crossing as a pedestrian, I'm behaving. I'm inhibiting the crossing because I saw a car coming by. So if you see me standing still, you might think I'm doing nothing. No, I'm doing a lot. I'm avoiding crossing, right? So you might see a plant doing nothing and you might think it's doing nothing. It might be doing a lot. That depends on, difficult. And below ground, so much stuff. I mean, the roots, again, this is another bias. Most of the research on plant roots for the last decades, until very recently, we have to trash it because it was done under light. Oh, the science, we did, no, this is amazing. It speaks to our arrogance. We need to see what the root is doing. Of course, switch the lights on. Come on, I can see the root. And they are photophobic. Oh my God, they are photophobic. Oh, small detail, right? So you see, we need to put ourselves in their shoes. And if we don't put ourselves in their shoes, we will never get it.
Nora?
Hola, Paco. You showed us the behavior of wild rice versus the hybrid kind.
Yeah.
What is exactly that was altered that made them so different? And what would that reveal about the agricultural practices these days?
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a mutant. That's not a paper from our group. So that's somebody else's. I don't know exactly how they did that. So they knocked down genes, but I don't know exactly what they did. So effectively, what's happening here is that they can't circumnutate anymore. So circumnutation has to do with the differential elongation, right? So this is a different concentration of auxin, this hormone, right? So it's a different concentration of either side. So that's making cells elongate more one way or another, and that's making this pattern, differential pattern of. So it's like nodding one way or another, right? So that pattern is what you miss, right? Now in agriculture there is a lot of that. So there is a lot of research in engineering, right? Genetic engineering, that's something I'm not that familiar or interested in, because I would like to think that what's truly relevant is to deal with heterogeneity. We are going the other way by playing this game. We are making them become homogeneous, and that's doing a disservice. But as to the details, I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. Yeah.
Okay, one final question.
Thank you very much for your beautiful talk. I wanted to ask about research ethics. So you mentioned a lot of different methods you've used to study plants, like anesthetizing them or sort of inducing jet lag or putting them in sanitized soils. And I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on how we could approach the practice of research in a way that is in more harmony with, or that shows greater respect for the things that we've learned through this research.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that gives me some headaches, because definitely, because you have to think ahead of. I mean, policies will come later, way later, right? So even within the animal kingdom, if you have to do this signature, I don't know what you call that in English, but you have to, right? Right, so you do that for rat lab, right? But you don't do that for fruit flies. So for Drosophila, you don't do it. So you get rid of your flies because they are invertebrates. So imagine how far we are from understanding what to do with plants, right? Now, if what I do myself is what we are, in the lab, we are round the clock time-lapsing vines. We time-lapse the first few, weeks. Is when we want to see whether they are. What we do basically is kinematical or dynamical analysis of plant behavior, like vine behavior. Like as they approach a pole, we study the velocities, the patterns of acceleration to see if the plant is actually simply bumping onto the pole, like out of mere growth. I just grow, oops, lucky me, I bump onto the pole, or they are effortfully trying to reach for it. So we can, study kinematically and dynamically those patterns, the pattern of growth, to see whether there is intentional behavior or simply the mere lack of bumping onto the target, right? So we do that in the first few weeks. So once they reach, put it this way, once they clasp onto the pole and twine around, I'm not interested in them anymore. Now what happens? What do you do with those guys, right? So what I do is I have this booth in the class lecture hall. So I send this email to students and say, hey, we have these subjects, they need a home, we've been time-lapsing them, now you can take them. Luckily in Murcia we have orchards all over the place, so people can take them and plant them in their orchard and things like this. But again, when you think of making compost, what do you think of that? Is compost ethically what? Because most of them become compost. Now, seriously, I take your point, but there is no easy solution. Anything you do, there is going to be an issue with whatever you do. So there is no easy way out.
Let's thank Paco for fantastic talk.